Everything you have been told about power is wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong, and that is exactly why it has not worked. The men who actually hold power are not doing what you think. They built it differently. They protect it differently. They use it differently. 9 things most men get wrong. This is what power actually looks like. Think about every time you tried to understand power and still felt like you were missing something. You read the books. You studied the frameworks. You watched the men who seemed to have it. And still, when you walked into the rooms that mattered, something did not transfer. Here is why. Most of what is taught about power is observed from the outside. It describes what powerful men look like, not how they actually operate. The visible surface of power is almost always a performance. What is underneath it is almost never shown. The result is that most men are chasing a version of power that does not exist. They are building toward a model that the actually powerful are not using. And the gap between the model they are chasing and the reality of how power works explains almost every frustration they have had in rooms where it mattered. In 2026, this gap is wider than it has ever been. Jeffrey Pfeffer at Stanford Graduate School of Business has studied power in organizations for 4 decades. His finding is direct, and most people resist it when they first hear it. The rules of power have not changed. The game is still played by the same principles it has always been played by. What has changed is how many people believe the rules no longer apply, and that belief that the old dynamics are gone, that hierarchy is dead, that relationships no longer determine outcomes, is the most expensive mistake a man can make in any serious environment. 9 things most men get wrong about power. Starting with the most common one. Mistake 1. Power comes from your position. Here is what most men believe. Get the title, get the role, get the position, and the power follows. Here is what actually happens. You have seen men with significant titles who have no real influence, whose decisions get quietly undone by people 3 levels below them, so whose directions get nodded at in the meeting and ignored in the execution. They have the position. They do not have the power, and you have seen men with no formal title who somehow shape every significant decision in a room, whose opinion is sought before the meeting starts, whose absence is noticed in a way that most senior people in the room. They have no position. They have all the power. Jeffrey Pfeffer at Stanford Graduate School of Business has documented this for 4 decades. His research on organizational power shows one finding consistently. Real power is relational, not positional. It lives in the network of obligations, information flows, and social debts that a man builds over time. The title is a signal. The network is the actual thing. Here is the dark side of getting this wrong. The man who believes power comes from position spends his career chasing positions. Each position feels like it will finally deliver the influence he is looking for, and each time he gets there, he finds that the position gave him authority, but not power. Authority is the right to direct. Power is the ability to actually change what happens. They are not the same thing. And confusing them is what keeps most men on a treadmill of achievement without leverage. In 2026, with AI restructuring organizations faster than any previous technology, formal positions are more unstable than at any point in the last century. Roles are being eliminated, redefined, and consolidated at a pace that makes positional power even more fragile. The men who built relational power, networks of people who trust them and want them to succeed, will survive every restructuring. The men whose power lived entirely in a title will not. The real measure of your power right now is not your job title. It is this. If your position disappeared tomorrow, how many of the outcomes you currently influence would still happen because of your relationships? That gap between your positional power and your relational power is your actual vulnerability. And the next mistake is one that sounds like strength, but functions as its opposite. Mistake 2. Power is taken, not given. Most men in serious environments believe that power is a zero-sum competition. You take it, or someone else takes it from you. The aggressive, dominant approach is the winning approach. Here is what the research actually shows. Joey Cheng at the University of Illinois and Jessica Tracy at the University of British Columbia spent years studying two distinct paths to status and power. They called them dominance and prestige. Dominance is the path most men think of when they think of power. Force, intimidation, taking space, making others feel small. It works in the short term. People comply because they are afraid not to. Prestige is different. It is built through demonstrated competence, genuine contribution, and the voluntary admiration of others. People follow a prestigious man because they want to, not because they are afraid of what happens if they do not. Here is what makes this critical. Dominance-based power creates compliance. Prestige-based power creates loyalty. Compliance is fragile. The moment you are not in the room, compliance disappears. The moment someone more dominant arrives, your compliance-based followers shift. The moment your position is threatened, the people whose compliance you bought are calculating their next move. Loyalty compounds. The people who follow you by choice become advocates, multipliers, and defenders. They extend your influence into rooms you cannot be in. They protect your reputation when you are not there to protect it. They bring you information you would not otherwise receive. In 2026, in distributed and hybrid work environments where surveillance of behavior is impossible, dominance-based power has essentially collapsed. You cannot intimidate people into performing when you cannot see them. What remains is prestige. The leaders who built influence through genuine contribution and authentic relationships have maintained their power through every disruption of the last 5 years. The ones who relied on dominance have lost it with every restructuring. Here is the dark psychology dimension. The men who rely on dominance have to constantly work to maintain it. Every day without demonstrating dominance is a day their power erodes. It is exhausting, unsustainable, and it attracts exactly the kind of challenges it was designed to prevent. Because men who operate from dominance signal to every ambitious person around them that the way to advance is to take them down. They select for challengers. The prestigious man attracts collaborators. He selects for people who want to build alongside him. One of those is a strategy. One of those is a trap. Most men are in the trap and do not know it. And the next mistake is about who has the power and who is just performing it. Mistake 3. The most powerful men are the most visible. Here is a pattern you have probably seen without naming it. The most vocal person in the room is rarely the most powerful. The man who speaks last and says the least is often the one whose word ends the discussion. The person whose name everyone knows is often less influential than the person whose name most people do not. Power in mature systems flows toward men who do not need to perform it. Robert Greene documented this as one of the laws of power. But the neuroscience behind it is more specific than the observation. Dasher Keltner at UC Berkeley has studied what he calls the power paradox for 2 decades. His research shows that the acquisition of power changes behavior in ways that are almost universally counterproductive to holding power. Men who gain power become more impulsive, more self-focused, and less accurate in reading other people. The very behaviors that high visibility performance requires, constant assertion, frequent demonstration of authority, public positioning, accelerate this deterioration. The men who hold power longest are those who actively resist the pull toward performance. They maintain the habits that built their power in the first place. Attention to other people, restraint in speech, deliberate rather than reactive decision-making. These habits are invisible, which is exactly why they work. Here is what this looks like in 2026 specifically. Social media has created an entire economy of performed power. Follower counts, engagement metrics, and public recognition have become proxies for actual influence. Men confuse visibility with power because the incentive systems of every digital platform reward visibility, and the actually powerful are largely absent from those platforms. Not because they are not aware of them, because they understand that visibility at scale is almost always incompatible with the kind of trust and discretion that real power requires. The men whose influence shapes industries, institutions, and outcomes are almost never the ones with the largest public platforms. They are the ones who control access, shape narratives behind closed doors, and build the relationships that the visible men are dependent on. The dark psychology application. If you are spending significant energy building your public visibility, ask one question: is the visibility building the relationships that produce actual power, or is it building an audience that produces the performance of power? Those are very different things with very different outcomes. And the next mistake is one that has ended more influence than almost any other mistake on this list. Mistake 4. Power requires aggression. Here is what most men in competitive environments believe without examining it. Strength is demonstrated through aggression. Softness is weakness. The man who pushes hardest wins. Here is what Dasher Keltner found after 2 decades of research on the psychology of power. He calls it the power paradox. And the paradox is this: the behaviors that most men believe lead to power, assertiveness, dominance, willingness to use aggression, actually cause the rapid loss of power. Not sometimes. Consistently. Across organizations, relationships, political environments, and social hierarchies. Here is the mechanism. Power, at its core, is the ability to influence what other people do. To influence what other people do, you need their cooperation, their information, and their goodwill. Cooperation, information, and goodwill are all voluntary. You cannot extract them through aggression. You can temporarily coerce behavior through aggression, but you cannot build the networks that produce lasting power through a method that destroys trust. The men at the highest levels of influence in any serious environment, not the most visible men, but the most actually powerful, consistently demonstrate something that surprises people when they see it up close. They are unusually good at reading other people. They listen more than they speak. They give credit readily and take very little. They make the people around them feel capable and respected. These are not soft behaviors. They are the precise behaviors that produce loyalty, information flow, and the extended networks that lasting power requires. Aggression produces fear. Fear produces surface compliance. Surface compliance is the most brittle form of power that exists. Here is the dark side most men never think about. The man who uses aggression to hold power has to continuously escalate, because every time you use aggression to maintain compliance, you slightly increase the threshold required for the next time. The men around you become habituated. What worked last time requires more intensity this time. This is the same dynamic that makes any force-based system inherently unstable. It requires constant escalation just to maintain the same level of control. And eventually the escalation exceeds what the system can sustain. Every powerful man who fell through aggression fell for the same reason. Not because aggression stopped working, because it required so much aggression to maintain that it became impossible to sustain. The men who hold power longest are not the most aggressive. They are the most trusted. Trust scales. Aggression does not. And the next mistake is about something most men think increases their power, but actually destroys it. Mistake 5. More options means more power. Here is the intuition most men operate from. Keep all your options open. Never close a door. The man with the most options has the most leverage. Here is what Sheena Iyengar, Columbia Business School, has documented after decades of research on choice. More options do not produce more power. They produce more paralysis, more diffusion of attention, and more vulnerability to the people who have chosen to go deep while you went wide. The man who is a credible option in 20 different situations has real leverage in none of them. The man who is the only credible option in one situation has all the leverage in that situation. Power concentrates around irreplaceability, and irreplaceability requires depth, not breadth. Depth requires commitment to a specific direction, which requires closing other doors. Every man who has built real leverage has done it through a version of the same move. They identified the specific intersection of what they do uniquely well and what the market values significantly. And they went so deep into that intersection that they became essentially irreplaceable there. The optionality approach, keeping everything available and committing to nothing, is the structural opposite of this. Here is what this looks like in 2026. AI has dramatically lowered the barrier to competence in almost every domain. Tasks that required significant human expertise 2 years ago can now be handled by AI systems at a fraction of the cost. The domains where human irreplaceability still commands premium power are narrowing fast. The men who win in this environment are those who went deepest in the areas where human judgment, relationship, and trust still cannot be replicated. The men who stayed broad, who kept their options open, who never went deep enough to be genuinely irreplaceable anywhere, are finding that broad competence without depth has almost no leverage in an AI-augmented world. The counterintuitive move right now is to close doors, to commit, to go deep, to become the specific person rather than the flexible person. The flexible person is useful. The specific person is irreplaceable. Useful gets hired. Irreplaceable sets the terms. If power has ever felt like something other people have, and you cannot quite reach, subscribe to Dark Architect. This is exactly what we break down every week. The button is right there. The dark side of missing this. Every time you keep an option open to preserve flexibility, you're paying for that flexibility with depth somewhere else. You're trading leverage for comfort. And comfort feels like safety until you find yourself in a room where nobody needs exactly what you have. Power is not about having the most options. It is about being the option that nobody wants to be without. And the next mistake is about how most men think about the destination of power versus the reality of it. Mistake 6. Power is a destination. Most men think about power as a place they will arrive at. When I have this position, when I have built this thing, when I have achieved this level, then I will have power. Here is what men who have been there for years will tell you. Power is never a state you arrive at and then maintain passively. It is a practice. It requires continuous investment in the relationships, information, and reputation that produce it. The moment you stop actively building the network begins to atrophy. The moment you stop demonstrating the competence that built the prestige begins to fade. Power is not a possession. It is a rate of exchange. You produce something that others value, and in exchange, they give you influence. Stop producing, and the exchange stops. Wharton research on effective leadership shows something that maps directly to this. The leaders who maintain influence over the longest time horizons are those who never stop treating power building as an active discipline. They chose their battles with deliberate strategy rather than trying to win everything. They maintained the habits of attention, generosity, and strategic restraint that built their influence in the first place. Not as a performance, as a daily operating practice. The men who burned out their influence fastest were those who reached a level of power and then shifted from building to defending. Defense is reactive. Defense is expensive. Defense signals to everyone watching that what was built is now fragile enough to need protection. And signals of fragility attract exactly the kind of challenges that fragility cannot withstand. Marcus Aurelius understood this during 20 years as the most powerful man on earth. He wrote in Meditations not about how to use power, but about how to maintain the internal practices that produced his judgment. He understood that power was not the goal. The goal was the quality of decision-making and leadership that power made possible, and that quality required daily practice, not arrival at a position. The practical implication: stop measuring your power by what you currently have. Start measuring it by the rate at which you are building the things that produce power, relationships that compound, reputation that deepens, judgment that sharpens. These are the inputs. Power is the output. And like all outputs, it requires continuous input to maintain. The next mistake is one nobody talks about because it is the one that feels like protection. Mistake 7. Power protects you. Here is what most men believe when they imagine having real power. Nobody can touch me. Nobody can hurt me. Nobody can take what I have built. Power is the protection. Here is the reality that most men who have it discover. Power makes you a target. More precisely, it makes everything you have built a target for everyone who wants what you have. And the number of people who want what you have increases proportionally with how much you have. The men at the highest levels of power in any serious environment live with a specific awareness that most aspirants do not. Threat is constant. The people who currently cooperate with you are calculating what they get from that cooperation. The moment the calculation shifts, so does the cooperation. The relationships that produced your power are maintained by continuous value exchange. They are not loyalty in the unconditional sense. They are calculated alignment. And calculated alignment holds exactly as long as the calculation favors it. This is not pessimism, it is operational accuracy. The men who understand this build their power structures accordingly. They do not assume loyalty. They maintain value exchange. They do not assume alliances are permanent. They tend them continuously. They do not assume that past contributions protect future position. They keep contributing. The dark side of believing power protects you is what it does to your vigilance. The men who believe their power protected them stopped doing the things that built the power in the first place. They stopped tending relationships because they assumed the relationships were secured. They stopped demonstrating value because they assumed their value was established. They stopped reading the room because they assumed the room was on their side, and the deterioration that followed was not sudden. It was gradual, almost invisible until it was irreversible. In 2026, with organizational structures changing faster than at any point in recent history, and AI accelerating every kind of disruption, the assumption that power protects is more dangerous than it has ever been. What you built last year is not necessarily relevant to what the environment needs this year. The men who hold power through disruption are not the most powerful men in the stable periods. They are the most vigilant. They keep asking the same question the people without power ask. What do I need to build to be relevant here? And they never stop asking it. The next mistake is about information, and it is the one that has changed most dramatically in the last 3 years. Mistake 8. Information is power. For most of recorded history, this was true. The man who had information that others did not have controlled outcomes. He knew the trade routes, the military positions, the financial conditions. That information asymmetry was power. Here is what changed. In 2026, almost all information is available to almost everyone at almost no cost. The trade routes are on every mapping application. The financial conditions are published in real time. The scientific research is accessible within minutes of publication. The information advantage that once took decades to build can be replicated by anyone with an internet connection in hours. Information as power has collapsed. What replaced it is something most men have not caught up to yet. Narrative is power, not information itself. The frame through which information is interpreted, not the facts. The meaning that is made from the facts, not what happened. The story of what it means that it happened. The men who hold disproportionate influence in 2026 are not those who have access to the most information. They are those who control how that information is interpreted. The analyst who sees the same data as everyone else and frames it in a way that changes what decision gets made. The leader who takes the same facts his competitors have and builds a narrative around them that attracts resources, talent, and trust. The operator who understands that in an information-abundant environment, clarity and meaning are the scarce resources. This is not spin. Spin is manipulation of information to obscure truth. Narrative power is the ability to synthesize complex information into a coherent story that allows people to act. And this distinction matters because in a world where everyone has the same information, the differentiating skill is the human capacity to make sense of it, to hold the context, to see the pattern, to tell the story that allows the right action. AI can aggregate information faster than any human. AI cannot yet build the trusted relationships through which interpreted meaning travels. That is the human advantage that compounds. Here is the practice. Stop hoarding information. Start building your capacity to interpret and synthesize it. The man who can walk into a room and help 10 people make sense of the same situation they were all already looking at is more valuable than the man who has information nobody else has. One compounds, the other depletes, and the last mistake is the one that keeps the right men out of power entirely. Mistake 9. Power corrupts. This is the most expensive mistake on this list, not because it is wrong about some people, because it convinces the right people to stay away from power entirely. Here is what the research actually shows. Power does not corrupt. Power amplifies. It takes what is already there and makes it larger. Dacher Keltner has documented this extensively. The men who became more corrupt, more self-serving, and more destructive when they gained power were not corrupted by the power. They were already oriented that way before they got it. The power removed the social constraints that had been moderating their behavior. It did not create the behavior. It revealed it. The men who became more effective, more generous, and more consequential when they gained power were also already oriented that way. Their power amplified those qualities too. Same mechanism, completely different outcome based on what was already present. Here is why this matters so much right now. The belief that power corrupts has functioned as a moral deterrent that keeps ethical, capable, generous men from seeking influence. They believe that seeking power is inherently corrupting, that the desire for power is itself a character flaw, that the right posture is to avoid it and focus only on contribution without influence. And the result is that the rooms where the most consequential decisions get made are disproportionately occupied by the men who have no such reservations, who wanted power before they had it, who were already oriented toward self-interest and pursued power in service of it. The world does not suffer from too many good men with power. It suffers from too few. The men who withdraw from power out of a concern that it will corrupt them are not being humble. They are being absent from the rooms where their presence was most needed. Here's the implication. If you have the orientation, the judgment, and the genuine care for outcomes that would make you a force for something meaningful, the ethical position is not to avoid power. It is to pursue it deliberately, maintain the practices that built your character, and use it in ways that compound rather than extract. The men the world most needs at the highest levels are the ones most likely to believe they should not be there. That belief is the final obstacle, not external, internal. The 9 mistakes are the map. The territory is every room, every relationship, and every decision from here forward. Here is what changes when you understand all 9. You walk into a room where someone holds a title that impresses most people. You do not assess their position. You assess their network. You look for where the actual influence flows and toward whom. And often, the most powerful person in that room is not the one at the head of the table. You see a man performing dominance and recognize it immediately as fragility. Not strength performing itself, but strength compensating for something underneath. You do not compete with it. You watch where it leads. And you build differently. You see a man who is everywhere, on every platform, in every conversation, with every opinion. And you notice that the men who actually shape the outcomes he talks about are nowhere to be seen. You understand the difference between the performance of power and the practice of it. And you choose the practice. You face a situation where the information in the room is the same for everyone. And instead of looking for an information advantage, you build a clarity advantage. You become the person who helps the room make sense of what everyone is already looking at. That is not information power. That is interpretive power. And in 2026, it is significantly more valuable. You reach a level where you could stop building, where what you have seems like enough, and you recognize that moment as the most dangerous one. The moment most men stopped doing the things that built what they have. So you keep going, not from insecurity, from understanding. And when someone suggests to you that seeking power is inherently corrupting, that the right posture is to stay small and contribute quietly, you recognize that belief for what it is. The final obstacle. The one that kept the most capable men from the rooms that needed them most. You go anyway. 9 mistakes. 9 corrections. Not philosophy. Not motivation. The actual mechanics of how power works in the real world, among real people, in real rooms. The next video is already loaded. It covers the psychology of deep thinkers, specifically what separates the men whose thinking produces real outcomes from those who think deeply and produce nothing. Watch it now. Subscribe to Dark Architect. Every week we break down the exact mechanics behind how power, influence, and human behavior actually operate. No motivation, no fluff, just the mechanics. The men the world needs at the highest levels are the ones most likely to believe they should not be there. Now you know why that belief is the obstacle and what to do about it.